The sun had long stopped shining the same way it used to before the arrival. Earth had not been invaded in the way old science fiction novels predicted, but it had still been conquered. Conquered by awe, by inferiority, and by quiet humiliation. The Valari came not with weapons but with knowledge, towering ships that folded space like parchment, technology that made humanity's proudest creations look like children's toys. They arrived offering peace, claiming no desire to rule, but even kindness can humiliate. And Earth, tired of war and poisoned skies, had no will left to resist the offer of being protected like a pet. In the heart of what was once the American Midwest, now part of the terrestrial observation zone, lived a man named Thalen Doran. He was not famous, he had no rank. His name meant nothing beyond the registration chip embedded under his collarbone. What made Thalen different was not visible at first glance. His body sat slouched in a manual wheeled chair, legs unmoving since the spinal nerve collapse 10 years ago. Some still whispered that he had once been a soldier, but in a world run by aliens and algorithms, memory meant little, and rumors less. He lived alone in a stone and silicon hybrid structure that had once been a schoolhouse, now half shelter, half refuge for the few who still sought quiet in a world humming with Valari drones and human sycophants. The days passed slowly, and Thalen preferred it that way. He kept a solar kettle for tea, read books the Valari considered cultural fossils, and watched the skies like someone hoping the stars might apologize. It was on one such day, sky, gray and wind sharp, that she arrived. The delegation walked in tall and graceful, escorted by human guides who spoke with strained smiles and postured obsequiously. At the front was a Valari woman unlike any Thalen had ever seen. Most of their kind wore fluid reflective armor or biotextile suits that pulsed with ambient energy. She wore nothing like that. Only a single-panel cloak of woven crystal fiber and an expression that could have shattered concrete. Her name, spoken like the first crack of thunder, was Vera. She didn't look at him at first. The other Valari passed him without pause. A few humans noticed him, whispering behind cupped hands. There he was again, the broken earthling, watching from the edge of the gathering. It didn't offend him. He had long grown used to being less than invisible. But then her eyes, unearthly, like molten obsidian carved by starlight, settled on him, not in pity, not in disdain, in curiosity. She approached him while others circled the garden's ancient fountain, the center point of the old academy grounds. Her movement was measured, not arrogant. She crouched slightly to lower herself to his eye level, though he sat far below her. Her voice was low, musical and unfamiliar. "You do not stand." Thalen smirked. "Not without making a fool of myself." She tilted her head, curious. "Why?" "Because I can't. My body doesn't listen anymore." "You are injured," she said slowly, like trying on new words. "Irreversibly?" "Yes. Irreversibly." "I see." She did not offer sympathy, nor did she turn away. Most Valari would have left by now, the conversation already deemed unproductive. But Vaera remained, eyes sharp, watching him as if he were not broken but encrypted. "You have the scent of war," she said. Thalen laughed once dryly. "That's either a compliment or you've picked up something from my old clothes." "I do not joke," she said flatly. "Neither do I most days. But I try." For a moment, neither spoke. The delegation moved on, and a human liaison nervously called after her, clearly not comfortable with her wandering off script. Vaera ignored them. "You are unlike the others." "Let me guess," Thalen said, gesturing vaguely at the group. "Less groveling, more unafraid. You are wounded, yet you speak to me as an equal." "Should I not? You are weak." "Physically? Sure. But weakness is context, isn't it? Drop you in a desert with nothing but a stick, and we'll see who lives longer." She did not smile, but her eyes narrowed slightly, an expression he would later come to understand as Valari amusement. Before she left, she asked for his designation. "Thalen Doran," he said. "And you?" "Vaera of the Third Spire." "A pleasure, Third Spire." That day passed like fog curling through iron fences, but something lingered. She returned the next day. She stood in the doorway of his home, unannounced, her cloak dusted, with sand and her expression unreadable. Thalen, brewing morning tea from crushed amber leaf, blinked at her without surprise. "You're not exactly blending in," he said. "I do not intend to." She entered without asking, scanning the room with curiosity. Shelves lined with printed books, archaic data drives, and old earth paintings. A hollow terminal blinked quietly in the corner, outdated and unused. She paused in front of a photograph, faded, torn, of a younger Thalen in combat gear standing beside a comrade now lost to time. "You were a soldier." "I was a man who followed orders," he replied. "You fought during the interstitial collapse?" "Among other things. And, now you drink leaf water." He gave a short chuckle. "Don't knock it until you try it." To his surprise, she did. The days blurred. Thyra returned again and again, always with a question, never with a clear agenda. She seemed less interested in human culture than in him specifically, as though she were dissecting a puzzle not meant to be solved. She asked about his injury. He explained the spinal blast, an indirect hit during a last stand at Iraq Basin, back when Earth still had armies. He told her about the numbness, the pain that flickered behind the skin, the dreams of running that sometimes woke him in tears. She listened. He told her about the way others looked at him now, like he was half a man, or worse, an embarrassment, to be pitied, how humans praised Valari aesthetics, copied their mannerisms, longed for their approval, how Earth had forgotten its scars and embraced its leash. "You resent us," she said. "No," he replied. "Resentment would mean I still cared enough to be angry. I observe. I remember. I endure." "Endurance," she said slowly, "is not the same as strength." "No," he said. "It's harder." One day she brought him a device, small, crystalline, warm to the touch. She placed it in his hand like a gift. It hummed softly and projected a memory. A battlefield of another world, Valari soldiers in sleek motion, bodies falling around her. There she stood, Vaera, flanked by enemies, her weapon broken, bleeding. But she did not yield. She raised a blade made from the shattered plating of her own ship and charged forward. He looked up at her, the projection still playing in echoes. "Why show me this?" "To say," she said quietly, "that I understand endurance." He nodded. On the 7th day something changed. The city center erupted in unrest. A skirmish, fueled by a Valari guard's overreaction to a human vendor refusing inspection. Protests surged, drones hovered. The air grew tense. Thalen heard it from his home, the tremors like angry heartbeats beneath his wheels. He rolled into the square unaided. The crowds parted slightly, not out of respect, but disbelief. What was a cripple doing here? Thyra stood among other Valari, shouting in her native tongue, trying to calm the escalation. But no one listened. The translator drone struggled with nuance. One man threw a bottle. A Valari drew a weapon. Thalen wheeled forward and spoke. Not loudly. Not with authority. But with something heavier. Clarity. He spoke of the past, of fire and ash, of what Earth lost not to aliens but to fear, to power, to forgetting the cost of conflict. He spoke of mercy, of exhaustion, of wanting more than just survival. He spoke in a way that made people remember what it meant to be human. They listened, even the Valari did. The weapon was lowered. The bottle thrower wept. The riot dissolved not in force but in fatigue. Thyra found him afterward, eyes unreadable. "You calmed them," she said. "I reminded them." She touched his shoulder. A Valari, gesture rarely given outside of deep trust. "I see strength now," she said, almost a whisper. "It frightens me." "Good," he replied. "Maybe that means it's real." That night, under a bruised sky, she stayed longer than usual. They did not speak of war, or pain, or pride. They sat in silence. She let her head rest lightly against his shoulder, and he did not move away. There was no declaration of love, no grand promise, only warmth. But sometimes that is enough to begin a revolution. The wind that swept across the observation zone carried a new kind of silence, one that hung not from fear or obedience, but from the hush of anticipation. Something had changed. Word of the incident in the city center traveled faster than light, through the neural net gossip feeds. A man who could not walk had stopped a riot. A Valari warrior had stood beside him, touched his shoulder, and said nothing in defense of her own kind's mistake. In both species, silence could speak volumes. Thalen felt it first in the way people looked at him, less like furniture, less like a story already finished. He was used to being seen and dismissed in the same breath, an old cripple with a sharp tongue and stubborn ideas. But now there was pause, hesitation. Even the city's AI nodes had begun to adjust the vocal tones of their greetings to him. Subtle shifts, but enough to prove that some authority somewhere had taken notice. He didn't care for the attention. He still made his tea the same way, still read battered old books, still sat outside in the courtyard and watched the clouds as if waiting for them to remember how to rain. But now he wasn't always alone. Vira came more often, sometimes with questions, sometimes with nothing, but silence. Their conversations became less like interrogation and more like the slow dance of strangers learning the rhythm of a shared language. She sat closer now, observed less, and experienced more. Sometimes she would walk with him. Well, he rolled, and she matched his pace, her tall frame moving with almost deliberate slowness so she wouldn't outpace him. She claimed it was to study his terrain adaptation behavior. He knew she was lying, and he let her. One afternoon, as pale sunlight filtered through the high-reaching spires of bioengineered crystal trees, she asked a question unlike the others. What is love to humans? He didn't answer right away. Thalen had never been asked that, not sincerely, not by someone who meant to understand. He looked at her, this towering warrior with skin like obsidian and veins that shimmered faintly when she was angry or curious, and thought about all the times he'd felt it, briefly, painfully, fleetingly. Love to him had been like rain in the desert, beautiful when it came, unreliable, often imagined. He hesitated. It's not one thing. It's a risk. A surrender, maybe. A kind of choice you make over and over, even when it hurts. Sometimes, especially when it hurts. She watched him quietly. That sounds, inefficient. He smiled. It is. That's the point. Baira tilted her head again in that precise way that meant she was pondering his words. Among the Valari, love is not spoken of with such vulnerability. Bonds are forged through combat, trial, or intellectual exchange. Emotion is secondary. In your terms, a reward, not a reason. Then maybe we're the backward species after all. Or perhaps, she said, softer than usual, you are not backward, but brave. He didn't say anything for a while. After that, days passed and the silence between them changed. It was no longer awkward, no longer thick with the weight of unasked questions. It became space, a space that welcomed breath, thought, presence. Vira began to bring things from the Valari archives. Not technology. She knew better than to assume Thalen would be impressed by that. But poetry, music, myths from her world's earliest recorded cycles. One evening she read to him from a fragment of Valari epic verse, her voice a low, vibrating current that seemed to pour from the stones themselves. It spoke of a warrior who failed every test but won peace through insight. Thalen, half lulled to sleep by the rhythm, murmured, "Was that a story about you?" She paused. "No, but I read it now and understand things I did not before." He turned his head and met her gaze. "What kinds of things?" "That failure," she said slowly, "is not always dishonor. That strength can exist in stillness." Thalen chuckled. "Took you long enough." She swatted his shoulder lightly, an imitation of a human gesture she'd picked up with careful observation. He laughed again, surprised by how easy it was becoming. This woman who once spoke like thunder was now something softer beside him, though not weaker. never weaker, but the world did not approve. Word of their closeness spread, mutated, grew. Whispers became statements, statements became warnings. A human envoy came to Thalin's home, all polite smiles and veiled threats. They urged him to be careful, for your own good, they said, for Earth's image. He asked if they were afraid of love or what it might mean to admit a human could be admired by a Valari. The envoy left unsatisfied. Vaera, for her part, received no envoy. She was summoned. Her recall order came through the neural chain with a command code so severe it burned the edges of her interface port. The Valari High Council had seen enough. It was unbecoming, one of their elite, consorting with a human male. Worse, one without utility, without movement. Her loyalty had been questioned, her standing threatened. And perhaps most painful of all, they called it a deviation of intent. Deviation. She stood in front of Thalin that night, arms crossed, jaw clenched, her voice taut. They've ordered me to return permanently. His face remained calm as always, but the lines around his eyes deepened. When? Tomorrow. He nodded slowly. Do you want to go? Silence. I do not know what I want, she admitted. He rolled closer to her, looked up into her unreadable expression. Then decide for yourself. Not for them, not for me. For you. Her jaw tightened. It is not that simple. I am not just a person. I am a symbol, a weapon, a tool of the Spire. You're more than all that, he said. At least to me. Those words hit something raw behind her eyes. Her breath hitched, so faintly it might have gone unnoticed if he hadn't been listening like a man hearing his last melody. She turned away but didn't leave. Not yet. I fear, she said, that if I stay, it will cost me everything. And if you go, I will lose something I have not yet named. Thalin didn't speak. Instead, he reached forward with effort and placed his hand on hers. His fingers were worn, his grip weak, but the warmth was real. Sometimes, he said, the thing you can't name is the most worth fighting for. She left that night with no promises, only a glance back. But it was a glance that held galaxies. The next day, she was gone. He waited. Days bled into nights. The news feeds were full of noise, some of it about her, the scandal, the disgrace, the swift demotion. Her name appeared less and less, as if erased from relevance. Some humans cheered the punishment, others mourned the loss of a diplomatic bridge. Thalin did neither. He remained quiet, watching the wind, remembering the sound of her voice and the shape of her silence. Then, after nearly 2 weeks, the broadcast happened. It came through a hacked Valari channel. Impossible, some said. Miraculous, others claimed. But to those who watched, there was no mistaking the source. Thalin sat before a low, makeshift camera rig. No makeup, no advisors, no holographic effects, just him in his worn chair, with storm-colored eyes and a voice steady as stone. He didn't plead, didn't rage. He spoke like he always had, clear, calm, slow. I am not your equal, he began. Not in strength, not in technology, not in mobility. I am just a man, a broken one. But I've learned that what you call broken is often just a different kind of whole. He talked of pain, of loss, of humanity's aching crawl through history. He talked of Vaera, not as a trophy, not as a prize, but as someone who saw him. And he saw her, not as alien, not as Valari, but as someone trying, struggling, changing. He ended with a question. If love between two species, two souls, is a scandal, then what do we worship if not connection? The feed cut out, but it was too late. The galaxy had already listened. Vaera returned, not with permission, not with escort. She came alone, in a small, stripped-down transport not built for comfort. Her armor was gone, her title revoked. But her eyes were clear and her steps sure. She stood at the edge of Thalin's courtyard once more, and for the first time, she didn't wait for him to speak first. I chose, she said. He didn't smile. He reached out. She knelt down. There, foreheads touched, her custom, not his. And there, between stone and sky, the two began again, together. The air carried the softness of early dusk, golden light filtering through the remnants of the old elm trees that had somehow survived climate collapse and time. Birds, genetically re-engineered to mimic those lost decades ago, chirped with synthetic purity, oblivious to the shift happening beneath their wings. Thalen sat in his usual place, his chair rooted between two sun-warmed stones, and beside him, Viera crouched with her arms resting on her knees, not as a warrior, not as a diplomat, but as a woman learning what it meant to simply exist. There, days had become slower, filled with the gentle repetition of new rituals. Viera took to sketching things she saw but could not understand. Old earth structures, forgotten relics, the odd twisting shapes of trees. She used human tools, pencil and charcoal, refusing the automatic rendering devices her people had mastered centuries ago. "I want to feel what it means to create with flaw," she explained once. Thalen only nodded. He understood. Sometimes they spoke of their pasts. Thalen told her about his brother, now lost in the migration chaos of the Pacific displacement. About the lover he had before the war, who left when the injury came, and the hospital lights burned day and night with no end in sight. Viera listened and never interrupted. When she finally spoke, it was of her training on Ile Varel, the glass city that floated over oceans of acid, of the silence she was taught to master, the emotional restraint they drilled into her, until even joy became theoretical. She told him of the first time she killed, not with regret, but with a strange, distant respect for the memory of someone she didn't hate. There was no need to prove anything to each other. Their honesty bloomed not in dramatic confessions, but in tiny, unspoken things. She brought him moss-wrapped parcels of Valari fruit, and he would peel them slowly, offering her the first slice. He fixed a broken solar valve in her transport, despite the tremble in his hands and the stinging flare of his back. When the pain made him bite down hard on his sleeve, she said nothing but gently pressed her palm against the back of his neck, until he exhaled. One night, a storm came. It wasn't unusual. These atmospheric outbursts were common now, sudden and vicious. But this one brought thunder with the roar of collapsing mountains. The rain hit in sharp, searing needles, and Thalen's home groaned under the weight of it. Power flickered. The comm line went dark. Viera moved like a shadow, sealing windows, anchoring outer locks, wrapping insulating fiber around the conduit ports. Thalen struggled beside her, fighting his own body's stiffness, but she didn't stop him or push him aside. When it was over, they collapsed in the inner chamber, both soaked and breathless. She leaned against the wall, head tilted back, tendrils of soaked hair clinging to her face. Thalen, chest heaving, looked at her and saw not an alien, not a soldier, but a woman who had chosen to stay through every kind of storm. "You don't miss it?" he asked quietly. "Your world, your people, everything they took from you." "I miss what I thought they were," she said. "But I do not miss who I had to become to belong." He studied her in the dim glow of backup power. "And now? Now, I am becoming something else." She reached for his hand. Not ceremonial, not tentative, just real. Their fingers laced together, awkward at first, hers longer, cooler, marked by fine calluses from weapon training. But they found a rhythm. The silence between them shifted again, fuller this time. Weeks passed, and with them came new challenges. Word reached them through the underground whisper net of watchers and rebels. The High Council had begun inquiries. Not open hostility, but quiet pressure. Earth's proxy governors were warned to keep the aberrant pair under observation. Viera's former unit had been scattered, reassigned. And more worrying, 2 cloaked drones had been spotted hovering near Thalen's home longer than necessary. He didn't tell her at first, but she already knew. "I can leave," she said one morning, as sunlight painted golden arcs across the worn stone floor. "Go off-grid, disappear. They won't follow if I become inconvenient enough." "You think I want you to go?" he asked. I think they will make you want me to. He looked up at her, his spine aching, the brace beneath his shirt biting into his ribs. Let them try. The decision came that night. Vyra began constructing what she called a resonance shield, a hybrid of Valari field tech and old Earth, electromagnetic disruptors. It wouldn't hide them forever, but it could blind sensors for a while. Enough time, she hoped, to make them forget, or at least lose interest. Thailand helped where he could, patching wires, calibrating Earth circuits to match Valari frequencies. They worked for hours, side by side, sweat and oil and faint surges of energy crackling between their hands. When it was done, they stood beneath the canopy of the old courtyard, watching the stars flicker uncertainly through the misted sky. Do you regret it? She asked. Regret what? Us. He didn't hesitate. Never. She nodded once, slowly. Then I will stay until they tear the stars down. They kissed that night, not like a first kiss, but like a vow. No firework, no music. Just mouths pressed together in quiet urgency, her fingers cradling his jaw, his hand tangled in the back of her tunic. She smelled like ozone and citrus. He tasted like rain. It was imperfect, clumsy, real. Afterward, they lay together on the soft mat near the old heater. She curled herself around him, her body carefully positioned so as not to strain his spine, her breathing slow and steady. He rested his forehead against her collarbone, listening to her twin pulses echo like soft drums. Are we foolish? He asked. We are mortal, she replied. There is nothing more foolish than pretending otherwise. Later, the surveillance drone came. It arrived cloaked in stealth fields, invisible to most sensors, but the resonance shield caught it. A ripple, a glitch. Vyra leapt into motion, activating a counterpulse while Thalen rolled toward the manual override. The drone tried to flee. It failed. They captured it, dismantled its recorder, and buried the husk in the ash garden near the rear wall. Vyra watched the disturbed soil for a long time after. They are testing us, she said. Let them. Next time they may not test. He looked up at her, jaw set. Then next time we fight. She didn't smile, but her eyes burned with something close to pride. That night they didn't sleep. Instead they sat in silence, weapons within reach, not to attack but to remind themselves they still had choices, that they were still alive and still together. Vyra spoke as the horizon began to bloom with dawn. There's an old Valari word, she said. Lothenvarai. It means a union without translation. What does that mean? It means love so specific, it only makes sense between the two who share it. Thalen nodded. Then that's what we have. And as the sun rose, painting, light across scars and old stone and hands laced tightly together, they believed it. Because some love stories aren't written in peace. They are carved into the bones of resistance. And this one had just begun to defy the stars. The final days of autumn settled across the valley like a gentle hush. The air turned crisper, the once bold greens of the trees now bleeding into hues of bronze and rust. The world around them changed, even as Thalen and Vyra held their fragile sanctuary steady, carving out peace not in defiance but in quiet determination. The resonance shield hummed faintly in the background, a low, steady sound like a breath being held, protective, wary. Despite its presence, they knew it was only a matter of time. Signs grew clearer, a sudden spike in communications silence. The ground sensors, usually passive, flickered with erratic feedback. Local vendors who once greeted Thalen with nods and warm bread began to withdraw, avoiding eye contact, speaking in whispers. The world was folding in on itself as if bracing for something inevitable. They didn't speak of it, not directly. But the sense of countdown lingered in everything, each shared glance, each evening beside the fire, each quiet meal. Thalen still woke to find Vyra curled beside him, always half alert, her hand near the sidearm tucked discreetly beneath the mattress. He never told her how comforted he felt by that small, sharp detail. Instead, they lived, laughed, argued even, over music, over the placement of solar collectors, over whether her home-brewed tea was better than the synthetic kind. Thalen continued tinkering, creating useless things with passion. Automated chimes that sang out the changing wind, a mechanical bird that flapped unevenly and refused to land. Vieira trained in the courtyard again, not for war, but because she loved the movement, the meditation of it. Sometimes she let Thalen watch. Sometimes she watched him instead, sketching quietly as he repaired some battered antique with fingers slower than they once were, but no less sure. One evening, she found an old earth piano score, yellowed and torn. She asked him to explain what it meant. "It's music," he said. "Written, felt, played by hand. I've never heard it." He wheeled to the corner where his old, half-functional keyboard sat. Dusty, ignored. He hadn't touched it in years. Then listen. He played. The keys were stiff, some broken. The rhythm stumbled in places, but as his fingers moved, Vieira knelt beside him, entranced by the rawness of it, the imperfection, the unfiltered heart that vibrated through every note. Her eyes shimmered faintly, not with tears, Valari did not cry, but with something close, something deep. That night, she kissed him again. Not gently, fiercely. The next morning the sky broke open. The descent of the extraction vessel was silent, veiled, invisible to most Earth tech. But the two of them felt it, the pressure, the shift. Vieira stood in the center of the courtyard, hands clenched at her sides. Thalen, slower now, came to her without a word. "It's them," she said. "They won't wait long," he replied. "No, they won't." She turned to him, face calm. "I should go. If I stay, you—" "No." His voice was firm, final. "We've talked about this. I can draw them away. They want me, not—" "No." He wheeled closer until he could reach her hand. "They can't take what we've built. Not unless we let them." Her eyes burned, unreadable. "Then, we stay. Together." The first contact was a warning, a pulse wave sent through the comm band, not violent but unmistakable, a demand. Vieira responded with silence. Moments later, the perimeter shimmered as 5 figures stepped through the shield's edge, tall and silver-clad, masked in the featureless armor of Valari reclaimers. They did not speak. Their weapons were not drawn but visible. Vieira moved forward, calm and fluid. She stood between them and Thalen. "You are trespassing," she said, her voice like steel. The lead figure's voice emerged, modulated and cold. "Vieira, of the Tessin caste. You are ordered to return under code 17 Talv. That code no longer applies to me. You are considered compromised." She raised her chin. "Then compromise this." Without warning, she activated the disruptor pulse she had been perfecting for weeks. A concussive shock burst from the ground, not harmful, but disorienting. 2 of the reclaimers staggered. In that instant, Thalen activated the second field, a SciFi cloaking prism that split the visual spectrum and masked their exact position for several seconds. They moved. Fast. Efficient. The pre-packed escape pod Vieira had hidden beneath the garden wall burst upward, the hatch already open. She guided Thalen in, fingers quick on the manual controls. The reclaimers regained their footing. One fired a warning shot, a bolt of sizzling violet plasma that scorched the earth beside them. Vieira turned, aimed, and fired once. The plasma. Bolt struck a reclaimer's foot, knocking him off balance. She didn't aim to kill, that was the point. "Launch now," she shouted. "But where?" Thalen shouted over the engine's whine. "Anywhere but here." The pod launched in a roar of displaced air and light. Vieira leapt onto the secondary ascent platform and latched to the hull. Behind them, the courtyard crumbled in a shockwave of retaliatory fire, but neither of them looked back. The stars met them. They soared beyond Earth's stratosphere into the blackness speckled with distant suns. Thalen, strapped in beside a panel of failing instruments, looked at Vera, breath ragged. "You planned that? I hoped it would not be necessary." He laughed, wild, sharp, alive. "You always did like a dramatic exit." Her smile was small, but real. They drifted for hours, letting the pod carry them into a trajectory far from any immediate patrol zones. Eventually, the silence settled again, not empty, but full of possibilities. Thalen stared out into the void. "We've got no home now, no support, barely a functioning nav system." Vira leaned back, eyes closed. "We've got each other. That's enough?" "It is everything." In time, they found a station, small, old, human-built, and long forgotten. A place for boss things. They docked, repaired, lived. They weren't fugitives. They were proof of survival, of choice. Of a love that crossed not just stars, but expectations and prejudice, and every line drawn by those afraid of change. In the years that followed, others came. Disgraced envoys, hybrid thinkers, artists, exiles, people who believed in connection, more than control. And among them, stories were told, of a man who could not walk but carried worlds inside him, and of a warrior who abandoned glory for love. They built a new kind of place. One without caste, without expectation. A place where names didn't define fate and where love, however strange, however improbable, was seen not as a flaw in the system, but its salvation. And every evening, as the sun, or whatever nearest, star-warmed their little corner of space, dipped low behind fractured steel horizons, Thalen would play the broken piano they'd salvaged, and Vira would sit beside him, sketching stars she'd never seen before, eyes full of wonder. Because, in a universe built to separate, they had chosen to belong. Together. Always.